And next up we have Dr. Nelly Oelke, who is with the University of British Columbia, and she's here to talk to us today about rural stories of getting back home, an integrated knowledge translation study of people's experiences of navigating access to healthcare from rural and remote communities in British Columbia, Canada.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. So I'd just like to recognize the two co-authors, Katrina Plamondon and Jude Cornelson, both from British Columbia. So just so you know, our health authority is the Interior Health Region, and we are the blue area, and we have 750,000 people in that area, 215,000 kilometers, with many mountain ranges and passes, and lots of small rural communities. We have 54 First Nations communities, which is the highest in the province. And we have 2 tertiary centres, 4 regional hospitals, and 16 community hospitals. So 19,000 people each year access urban referral services from their rural and remote communities in the urban centres. 25% of all patient activity in urban tertiary hospitals is for rural patients. They have longer lengths of stay than their urban counterparts, and delays are often unnecessary related to fragmentation. And they are a burden on the acute care system and on patients themselves as well, with related higher costs, etc. They experience greater impacts of system fragmentation and greater inequities in accessing services. So we used the There and Back Again study, focuses on the narratives of patients going back from a tertiary centre back to their community or to home. So we used a narrative methodology. We documented people's experiences through interviews. We did 28 interviews with patients and their family members. We had a group of seniors living in supported housing, and then 12 care providers were also interviewed. We looked at geographically balanced interview participants across the geography and distance to travel, so remoteness and size of community. We're also working on doing some dialogues with several Indigenous communities as we didn't have a high representation of Indigenous people in our participant population. We then analyzed our themes using a thematic analysis, common threads. We looked for common narratives. We looked at the context and wanted to maintain that context. And then we extracted micro-narratives around particular themes. And we created some composite stories, which I have one of those here for you. And so we focus on stories that tell us something about integration and its absence in healthcare systems. So what did we hear? So it was just another day. 5 p.m. when I arrived home from my office job and had sat down to watch the news. My back was sore from sitting all day at my desk. As I settled in on the couch, I started feeling all strange. There was a sudden pressure in my chest and I was getting lightheaded. My arms were hurting too. My eyes started going out of focus and I knew something was wrong. I grabbed my cell phone and called 911. This person actually was fortunate that they had cell coverage because we don't have cell coverage across our province. 911, what is your emergency? Chest hurts, can't see well, and with that, I blacked out. I eventually woke up around 1 p.m. the next day and found myself lying in a hospital bed, feeling groggy and not sure what had happened. A nurse came up to me and asked me how I was doing. She explained to me that I'd had a heart attack and that they had been able to stabilize me. She also told me that I needed to go to Kelowna, which is a long distance away in one of our tertiary centres, for some additional tests that could only be done in the tertiary centre. Kelowna, that's a really far drive. Are you sure we can't do the testing here? Unfortunately, Kelowna has the equipment we need to do the type of testing necessary, so they'll need to transfer you. Was there anyone you wanted us to contact to let them know that you're here? I lived alone. Sorry. I lived alone and my relatives were all on the East Coast. I preferred to keep to myself. I called my neighbor to let her know where I was. She said that if there was anything she could do to let her know. And so I was off in an ambulance with a 5-hour drive to go and see a heart specialist. So I arrived at 7 p.m. that evening. The heart specialist looked at me, did the tests, and determined that everything was okay. So I thought the ambulance would just take me back to Golden. But no, they said they could not. But a nurse said they wouldn't be able to. I started to panic. I had no shoes, no normal clothes, and no wallet, and no money. Where was I supposed to go? What was I supposed to do? I was overwhelmed and couldn't think clearly. It was late and I was totally exhausted. So I found a nurse and the tears just started to flow. She connected me with a counselor that then was able to find some shoes and book a room at a hotel that helped people from hospital stays stay over. They provided me with a bit of money that they had so I could have a taxi to get to the hotel. I then called my neighbor to let her know the situation. Since the Greyhound, that is our bus service that functioned up until 2018, is no longer running, she offered to drive down to pick me up as she happened to have the next day off of work. So integration must occur across a network of systems, that people understood that there was this whole system that worked together, but in actuality it didn't. There were all these different pieces of the system that don't work together. So we also saw narratives that showed disconnects between what was expected and operational realities of how these systems function. And then accessibility to doctors in small communities was described as being an unfair part of rural experience where they no longer had it or had a physician, and that the bureaucratic structure didn't allow for physicians to then come to the community. I mean, we used to have right here in the village a doctor's office where a doctor would come down here once a week, and he was always booked solid. And there once was a hospital here. It was shut down. It was operated well, but we don't know why it was shut down. So participants described the healthcare system as a single entity, as I said. They felt that it should just simply work. But they also recognized that the system was incredibly complex and massive and dynamic and had all sorts of subsystems that were grappling with lots of fragmentation. Participants' stories reflected incoherence between what they wanted from a healthcare system with what they experienced. We've had situations where they told us they would keep our ER open if we could find our own doctors. We went and found doctors, and they still threatened to shut us down. The system changed, and now people only get a limited service. So what are the consequences of poor integration? Discharge experiences illuminate the consequences people living rurally cope with when there is not an integrated system. The stories reflected the lack of integration between acute care and then multiple other networks such as primary care, home care, and allied health. Because they perceived the healthcare system to be a single entity, these experiences were often shared with bewilderment. Hey, how come that happens? And why can't you work together? So often non-communication is an issue. For home care, if you're released on Friday, you don't get help on Saturday or Sunday. You won't get help till Monday. I've heard a story of an elderly lady left on the front steps of her home in a wheelchair. She had no keys, no phone, and she had to get her neighbor to help her get inside. Integration is relational. Our stories show that they understood that there's a cog in the wheel and that they navigated that cog and the other convolutions of the system, and that they themselves required a lot of tacit knowledge in order to be able to navigate that system. What I have said to administration many times over the last 2 to 3 years, why are the patient care coordinators not talking to each other? These are the managers of the wards. Why are they not included in that 8:30 morning meeting? Every hospital or region has an 8:30 morning meeting where they discuss the transportation and discharge of different patients and transfer. I could just sit there and listen, and then I can hear what patients you're looking at needing to be transported back, and I could ask those questions quickly at that time. To me, the supervisor is the middleman. I don't need the middleman. I need the PCC. So integration requires inclusion. People's narratives revealed a deep desire to be included and to have a voice in decisions. People often expressed a desire to be better understood by the urban centers. They identified strongly with their community and want to be part of the dialogue with the health authority about their changing community needs. And when they were included, they were actually had a lot of gratitude and very thankful. I want to offer thanks and congratulations to the health authority because they responded very well to a request from the Community Health Society to establish telehealth service out of the clinic. Technology and integration, let's use that and use it appropriately so we can deal with some of these issues of fragmentation. So they talked about telehealth and how that might make a difference in integrating care as a promising mechanism for improving the connection across services and geographies. I drove too many hours and I saw the doctor for 10 minutes and he didn't even touch me. My girlfriend, she had just had a double mastectomy and she had to do a follow-up appointment, and they said, "Oh, you can just call in." She was so relieved because she was still in a lot of pain. It was winter, so we're looking at, she couldn't sit for more than an hour, like an hour. So you're looking at almost a 10-hour trip to get there and back. So I just want to say in conclusion that it's obvious that the system here has some real issues. We know that we've heard from people who had real concerns and that there probably are lots of good stories as well. But overall, we need to do some work in this area and address the area of transport for rural communities. We are going to move forward with a consensus approach to try and determine what do patients actually really want, and then to work and co-create some solutions and set some priorities to be able to address this issue.
Thanks, Nelly. Does anyone have any questions for Nelly? I'll just run this down.
Just about telehealth, what would it look like? Like, I've heard people mention it, but I don't know. How do you deliver it? What would work best in a rural setting?
So currently in our communities, a regional hospital or a community-based hospital will have a telehealth set up. The problem is that not all of these, if you need to talk to the doctor wouldn't have telehealth there. So what systems can we put in place that are confidential, because that's the other issue, security arrangements, and that are also available online, because we don't always have good internet or phone connections. So how can we do that best? So that really needs to be looked into, and look at all of those different issues, because the current system of telehealth isn't working.
Great.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you. Can you all please join me in thanking Nelly for her presentation?